Well, hey artists, welcome back to the art room. Okay, time for us to actually start some shading and putting some value on these glasses here, okay? So the first thing we want to do is actually just add a little bit of tone to the glass itself, okay? So one thing I can see in my photograph, which is really interesting, is just because of the angle at which I photographed it, this lips, this front edge appears to go, is in front of the glass. However, this back edge here, the ellipse reverses. This front edge of the glass covers this back edge. So that's kind of an interesting thing that's happening with just the angle of the glasses themselves. Pretty cool. So first thing I'd like us to do is we're actually just going to put kind of a tone over the glass itself, and then we're going to do some other shading work. So I'd like you to take your pencil and using very light pressure, ballerina pressure, I want you using kind of a curve, so I'm kind of doing like a this motion with it, a very soft curve, very light pressure, tilt your pencil to the side, and I want us to just start adding a little bit of value, a little bit of tone to the glass. So we're just shading here. Sorry, the talking you can hear in the background is my husband on a conference call because everybody's working from home. All right, there we go. Getting some, and no worries, I know there's some really bright highlights and things in there. We are absolutely going to get to that. We're going to get to all those value shapes, all those highlights, but right now we're just going to kind of create a nice soft tone for us to start working into. Then same thing on the other side. Your shading stroke is going to follow the curve of this glass. So it's very light pressure, very light tone, right? We don't want our glass to feel heavy at all. This is clear, see-through glass. We want it to feel light and transparent. And so I'm using just that subtle curve shading stroke. It's kind of like a little arc. I'm like kind of doing a little wrist twist here. Notice how I'm working with the side of my pencil as well. Okay, I'm bringing it down and around. And for those who, usually have class with me, I'm always doing like little talkings to myself. I'm always like, right? Doing some drawing. Okay, enter our tissue. Let's go ahead and wrap some of that tissue around our finger. Remember, if you don't have tissue, handmade blending stumps, Q-tips, paper towel, right? You can even just grab a regular, you don't even have to twist it, right? You can just take, there, piece of scrap envelope, right? You can just put piece of scrap envelope right around your finger and do some blending that way. I've got tissue, I'm gonna use a tissue. Okay, so I'm gonna take my tissue. And again, blending is a part of drawing. Blending is not just smearing. So I'm gonna use my curved shading stroke to now take and add a subtle little light gray tone to my glass. Okay, we're gonna do and repeat the same thing over here. We're just gonna add a light little tone. Now in this case, we're gonna focus on the outside, then add a little bit of tone to the inside of the glass. All right, we're just building a base to work into. I know there's a lot of other complex stuff happening in those glasses. And it's very light. Okay, now I'm gonna start kind of curving that stroke out a little bit more, just a little bit at the edges. And because we haven't erased any of our overlaps, everything still looks really transparent, which is super cool. I love that. Like it's already starting to look see-through. Okay, just the little subtle curves again. And just remember, if you're working with mechanical pencil, you are gonna have to really blend a bit more. Okay, grab my tissue again. Again, notice how I'm curving my blend stroke as well. We call this following the form when we're shading, right? This is a rounded form, so we're going to use a curved or rounded blending stroke. And already, just by adding that tone in there, do you see how I'm getting the illusion that these are solid, yet I can see other line work behind it, therefore transparent. Now I'm going to add a little tone in the back, but I'm going to reverse the curve. I'm kind of following the curve of that ellipse there on either edge. Okay. Now we're going to start looking. We've got the form shadow on there. Let's start looking for some darker value shapes. Let's start with the large glass, which kind of like work our way backwards to forwards. Okay. So looking at the dark glass here, I can see I've got some really dramatic darker value shapes or form shadow shapes. Form shadows are shadows that are actually on our object. Unlike cast shadows, which are objects, or I'm sorry, which are shadows that that happen when an object blocks light and it casts a shadow on a surface. Sorry, this is like one of those talk and chew gum at the same time things. I just can't. Sometimes I get shaded and I actually forget what I was saying. Crazy. I know. Okay. So what you can see is now I'm looking in the glass itself. I'm looking for those different dark value shapes. Within the glass itself. And I'm just looking for what's dark, using firm pressure on my pencil for what's dark, using lightening up on that pressure, using light pressure for what's light. And I did put a little bit of like a vivid light or noir stylized filter on this photograph to just help those shadows show up a little bit more. Do you know what I mean? Like subtlety is not our friend with glass. Those highlights are like really stark. Now don't worry about where this glass goes behind here yet. We're going to shade this part as what's happening on the front of the glass, seeing some of those overlaps. Okay. Now when we're drawing not from a photograph, I have a little bit of a different technique to kind of observe and draw what we're seeing. Okay, and then I'm going to grab my Q-tip. Remember, you can make a smaller Q-tip too. You can have like a big fluffy end and have a more detail end by just picking some of that cotton off, right? And just working with the edge of it as you need. And we want to kind of work with blending some of those pencil strokes out. Okay, working my way up the glass. I'm going to continue to look for dark value shapes. Now, if you've, kind of got this and you just want to pause the video and just keep doing your observational drawing kind of independently of me, awesome, go for it. Okay. Do what you feel comfortable with. If you still feel like you need to kind of just follow right along with me, great, follow right along with me. I love the company while I'm drawing. Okay, and this is that kind of center portion where it looks like that glass kind of like comes together there. Cool. All right, and then this part kind of comes around the exterior. There's another little light spot here. Okay. All right, and I'm still remembering like my curve shading stroke and everything as I go as well. You know, it starts to get a little bit more, let me blend that a little. Starts to get a little bit more complex as I get up into, oh, and this has this little line that kind of cuts right through there. Okay, starts to get more complex as I move up in to this part of the glassware. So this actually kind of lightens there a bit. Let me check and make sure I'm still. Sometimes I get going and I like totally forget I'm not on video still. Okay, so I'm gonna come further up here. Oops, stay awake, computer. Stay awake, I'm still drawing. And now I'm gonna start mapping in any little areas where the light kind of happens inside of those darks. And I don't want to accidentally shade into it, so it makes it easier to do my highlights later. So I'm just marking off those little spaces where I need to make sure I don't, you know, accidentally like shade into it. Because these are the bright highlights. They're those really bright reflections in the glass. So I'm just going to map a couple of those out. So I've got kind of a guide to follow where I need to do some erasing for our lighter values for the highlights, for all those beautiful highlights that are going to happen on there. I got a big window in my kitchen in the back behind me, which is what's creating a bunch of these highlights on the edge. So I'm just going to draw those shapes out, and then I'm going to go back to shading in where I see those dark value shapes. Okay. Now at this point, that my kind of darkest was happening down here around the bottom. Now I'm switching over to more middle pressure. I'm going to start calling these middle pressure or middle value shapes. Okay. There we go. Okay, and now going towards that more middle pressure. It's happening around this object, and I'm still remembering to curve my shading stroke as I go around, whoops, around the areas I want to leave highlighted. And again, just like with any other drawing practice, it takes time, it takes patience. One thing, if you notice you're starting to smudge a bit, no big deal. Just grab some of that scrap paper, a bit of tissue. Here, I'm going to pick up our old friend, the envelope here, to rest my hand on. And that'll prevent me from smudging all of my nice shading work so far. It gets a little bit darker over here, so I'm going to go a little bit firmer on that pressure. And then bring it on over. And I kind of like to use the process of like I shade a little, I pause, I blend, I shade a little more, I pause, I blend. You kind of get the idea. Okay, and then I've got another couple highlights coming up here as I work my way up the glass. A couple little highlights over here. And again, I'm just kind of marking in a basic area because I'm going to go back and work these highlights in as well with my eraser to keep them nice and crisp also. I can see this darker shadow kind of comes up the front edge of the glass here. And I'm just kind of now modulating my pressure, so where I see pockets of where it's more of a darker gray, I press a little bit more on that area. Where I see it goes a little bit lighter gray, I press a little bit less. And just kind of working my way around as I see those different values, and really, really take your time and do good observing. The more detail you can observe in these value shapes, these form shadow shapes, the more kind of realistic you'll get with that shininess of the glass. And then it gets just kind of a little bit kind of hazier up here. You lose some of that. Lose some of the edge of the glass there, but you still see it by some of the value shapes you see behind it. Okay. Coming together. Starting to see it happening. Okay, I'm gonna get my Q-tip out and now do a little, do some subtle blending. Now this is a curved surface, so you'll notice I'm still using kind of like a subtle arc, subtle curve to my blending. Right, blending's not just smearing the pencil around. You're still drawing, you're directing that pencil still. You're still doing real careful observation. As you create those shapes. Okay. I'm gonna keep going on this highlight here. That's a little bit darker value, so I'm going to darken that up. Okay. And now as I move towards this section of the glass, it really does kind of move into a lighter value range in tone. So you're going to see I start lightening up more and more on my pencil pressure, right? I was really heavy and dark down here. And now as I move over to this part of the glass, I start to really lighten it up. And I'm going to do this full glass with everyone, and then I'll pause it to do this, or at least to start the second one. So that's not just truly me drawing, you know, in silence on the camera for that amount of time. Okay. There we go. Okay, and then the values are really light over to this side. There just must have been a lot of light getting cast and caught over on this edge. So Now I'm lightening up those values. You'll notice I kind of switched to this vertical pencil stroke too, because this glass had a lot of kind of long lines of reflection in it. Again, just working back and forth between the darker and lighter values I see happening. I think it's a little darker again. Up here and around these edges. All right, and then bring this down here. Do a little blend. I'll finish off this edge and we'll switch over to working with our eraser to really refine and draw in those highlights we see. Okay. Grab my Q-tip. Because I still want my glass. The reason I like to get in there and really blend is I still want that glass to feel smooth. Right? We still want that glass to feel like it's got that slick, shiny surface to it. Remember, you are directing the pencil. You are not just smearing and blending at will. Okay. Okay. We got something that's looking pretty shiny, looking pretty good. All right, I'm gonna go over to this side now. I can see I have a fairly dark edge on this side. And remember, I'll worry about working into this glass next. And we'll work the overlap together, and then I'll pause the video to work on this section. Again, if you're feeling really confident with this, you're like getting the concept, you're like, yeah, I'm just following those shadow shapes. Please feel free to go on ahead. You're more than welcome, you know, depending on your level of drawing confidence, to move ahead of the video, keep working with the video. It's really your call. So I'm leaving those blank areas that are those really bright highlights open for now. And we'll go back and we'll touch them up even further with our eraser. Okay, we've got another kind of stripier, darker shadow there. Does that one go all the way to the edge? It does kind of, doesn't it? It does. Okay. And then we've got more kind of subtle, like right now I'm going to lighten up here. I'm just looking at those form shadow shapes. What's darker value, heavier pressure, lighter value, lighter pressure. Okay, let's get in here and do some more shading. Shade those in. Let's get some much lighter value here. Okay. Here we go. And there's the second part of my glass. Okay, once again, I'm going to use my Q-tip. And to go in and blend and smooth out some of my pencil strokes. Okay, now that I've done my dark and middle value form shadows, now I'm going to go in, I'm going to refine these highlights that I see happening in the glass using my eraser. And the highlights may be subtle, they may not be subtle, kind of depends. Some of your highlights are going to look like they have some little lighter gray areas in them, so you'll want to add those little subtle bits to it. But now we're going back and we're like drawing with the eraser. We're drawing in those delicate little value shapes. The lighter ones this time though. Now do not outline your highlights. That will just flatten them. No outlining on your draw-alongs. That doesn't help anything. Okay, use your tissue to dust away eraser crumbles and things that won't move. Okay. So I'm just going back in now with my eraser and drawing in those bits and edges of the highlights. If you have a highlight that goes right to the edge of the glass, take it right to the edge of the glass. We're going to make that edge of the glass reappear when we do our background. No worries. You can even get artistic with it too. It doesn't have to look exactly like the photograph. If you want to add an extra highlight here or there, why not? Why not? And then, like I said, take a little bit of time to just subtly, within the highlights themselves, if you see any little details like that, put those in. See some little highlights, you know, on the very edge of the glass there too. Get those in as well. Okay, so there's our glass in the background. I can see a few areas where I need to actually draw with my eraser and lighten up where I went a little too heavy. So I'm just very gently taking my eraser and lightening up any areas where, oops, you know, I just went a little bit too heavy with the shading. I need to just dial it back a bit, you know what I mean? You're just taking it down a notch. This is still pretty dark in here. I'm actually going to go through and darken this up a little bit more. This is pretty dark through in and around here. Okay, so there's one glass finished. Okay, let's move on to our foreground glass. Join me in the next section of this video. Well, hey all, thanks for joining me again in the art room. Okay, let's bring it forward. Let's work on this foreground glass a little bit. And specifically, we're going to start with this overlap section because I think it's the trickiest. And then we'll work our way out because this part of glass is the same as what we did over here, right? This overlap is the trickiest part. So this is what we're going to focus on the most. So when you look at the overlap, what you're seeing is not only this glass, but parts of this one behind it. And because the light is bending and refracting through this glass, some funky shapes are going to appear. So once again, I want you to start just with where you see those darkest value shapes. Use your firmest pressure. Because, right, like I can see the edge of this glass behind it. But then the other thing I want you to keep in mind is you want to leave spaces for those lighter values. And like on the front edge of this glass, I can see that the rim is actually highlighted. The reason we see the rim there is not because there is a heavy dark outline, but because the highlighted rim is left behind from these. I'm gonna put my hand back over my my paper here, but what I'm seeing is the lighter edge of the glass highlighted by these darker value shapes. So we're not outlining, we're just leaving that highlighted edge of the glass behind. And we'll see it appear as I do more shading. So again, the darker the form shadow shape, the heavier my pressure. The lighter my form value shape, whether that's a lighter value or a darker value, the lighter my pressure. Right, and the reason I see the edge of the glass there is because I've left it completely unshaded. There we go, so that's one area of the overlap handled. Now I can see the front edge of this glass, but also what's behind it, and lots of really complex light value shapes. So first I want you to draw out those light value shapes, those highlights, so that we know kind of like where not to shade, right? We're leaving a space behind. Capture as much detail as you feel you can. Remember, just like in our portrait, this is not about perfection. This is about doing just really excellent drawing practice. You're almost looking at like positive and negative light space. And because these glasses are curved, you get some really funky light things happening. This is a challenge. But challenge is good for us, right? If we just draw the same thing over and over again, and we never try to draw anything new, we're never gonna improve. Just aren't. We need drawing challenges to build our skill. Okay, cool. So now I've kind of mapped out where those light areas are on the overlap. Now I'm gonna start some shading again. I'm just looking for the different value shapes, dark, middle, light. We're gonna see the front edge of the glass appear because we've left those highlighted spaces. Just waking my computer up. Keeps wanting to go to sleep on me. And all I'm looking for is where I see dark value shape, and I draw that shape, and where I see middle value shape, and I draw and shade that shape, and where I see light value shape, and I draw and shade that shape. Now I know there's a lot of really complex little light flecks in there. For now I'm going to shade it, and I'm going to go back with my eraser to try to capture some of that. Now this edge of the glass is actually pretty light. It's got a very light tone to it. I'm just going to add on this very subtle light gray tone. What's going on behind it is actually much darker, so I'm going to go to my other glass and darken that so that edge of the glass shows up better. Okay, and then in here we still have some darker value shapes, so I'll go firmer with my pressure. And this is where you mechanical pencil folks, I gotta give my pencil a sharpen. You kind of almost have a little bit of an advantage because you got that really fine lead. Time for me to give my pencil a little sharpen here. some dark areas right around it. And I actually lose the bottom edge of this glass to kind of an interior curve shadow you see happening here on the interior edge. So I actually lose this corner of the glass ever so slightly, and then just kind of like twists up and curls. So that's where I'll leave it, and then we'll tack that bit next. Okay, that's kind of what I see. It's like this really wacky swirling happening within the glass. Okay, so I'm going to give it a little bit of blend, and then we'll go back for those highlight areas again with the eraser. All right, gave that a good blend, and now let's go back in and really refine some of those beautiful highlights with pencil eraser. Make sure we're really getting the edge of the glass there. Just dust some of my crumbles away, so I don't have a drafting brush or anything else with me right now. That shadow actually kind of curls in there. This is quite light all through this edge. Okay, so now that I've tackled this overlap here, now I'm going to start focusing on the rest of this glass. So same thing, I'm just going to start working with where I see those darkest value shapes, where I see those lightest value shapes, and continuing the same shading process I've done on this large glass. Okay, so that I don't create, you know, a terribly long video section here, I'm going to pause, I'm going to do some drawing, and then we'll come back together for the finish. So same steps as the large glass. I'm going to focus on my dark value shapes. I'm going to draw in where my highlights are so I can shade around them. Then I'll start working to the lighter form value shapes. Okay, and then finally we'll go back in and touch up with the highlights. So I'm going to do a little bit of drawing work, get a little bit further along, and I'll join you back here in the next section of the video. Well, hey artists, I'm back. Okay, so I've completed the second glass. I've used the same exact technique that I did for the large one, right? I looked for my dark shadows on the form shadows. I looked for some of those lighter values, highlights, went back in, did some erasing. And at this point, you know, we've got two really like see-through shiny looking glasses, but, it still feels a little bit blank. Right? It's still just kind of floating in space. So we want to give these glasses a setting and also anchor them with some cast shadow.